What up, comrades? Hope everyone's doing well. So we're gonna go through the Rift War. The Rift War. How do we get here? So I was listening to V Monroe, or what is it? No Time for Fun, or whatever his channel is. And he's a Romanian guy, V Romania, whatever. He's excellent. If you like commentary on cultural stuff, I like that stuff more. He also does political stuff as well, which I'm less curious about. Anyway, he kept bringing up the Betrayal of Krondor, which is a game I hadn't played since I was like, I don't know, 15 or whatever when it came out. And I was like, oh yeah, I should play that. I think I have it lying around somewhere because I have like a GOG version or whatever. So I found it, and I also have like Return to Krondor and Betrayal at Antara, which I don't think I'd ever played. And spoiler alert, I don't play it here either because I could not get it to work on my system. And if I have to spend more than an hour on trying to get a game to work, I give up and move on with my life because I there's like infinite supply, and like if I really want to play something, I'll just try it again later. That comes up a lot. I don't talk about those games because like they just don't work, and so then it's not really worth my time to sit here and like talk about or even bring up. But that's somewhat relevant because it's kind of in the same sphere. Anyway, so I was digging into it to kind of see which one came first, Betrayal or Return of Krondor, and there's some mixed information. But then I found out there's a whole book series that it's based on, which I don't think I knew before. I kind of figured there was, but then I was like, okay, so how many of these books do I got to read to like get like the backstory of like this game? And it was like only 3. So the author is Raymond Feist, and he's written like 20 something books in this series, but they're much better than The Wheel of Time, which I kind of hate because it's like 17 books and each book is like 10,000 pages, and like you have to read them all to get the full story. While this Raymond E. Feist has like trilogy, which I find much better. It's kind of like the Dragonlance. Like the reason Dragonlance is so readable is because it's like, here's a trilogy, here's like a couple one-off books, here's like another duology or whatever. Like you don't have to feel like you have to read 55 books to understand what's going on. Like everything's like nice and concise and like well explained. Anyway, so because I'm more focused on the video game stuff, I was like, okay, where do these fit? So then I found out that the author took Betrayal at Krondor and Return to Krondor and then like went back and like wrote them as books after the games to make them like more in sync with like the rest of his series. And I was like, that's dope. So we're gonna go by the book series chronology because the game is like confusing, and I even had like an argument with Gemini and then ChatGPT because they both just like could not fathom what I was talking about because they're like, no, just do what the books say, and I'm like, yeah, but the video games are not written like that. And it was like there may be some confusion. I'm like, no, though like there's no confusion. I'm telling you like that. And the reason why is because so there's a character James, Jimmy the Hand. He's one of the kind of main characters in the whole thing, at least the trilogy in the video games. And well, he's definitely one of the main characters in the video games, but in one of the video games he's like the main character. But then in the books he's also like a predominant character. It's one of those dumb fantasy things where it jumps between like 55 different points of view, which I kind of hate. But when it's done well, it's okay. I can read books like that, but I prefer just to have like one point of view or maybe like 2, to be honest. Anyway, okay, so we're going to read the original trilogy is how this finally came down. The original trilogy, which is Magician. Well, so and the funny thing, the other funny thing is there was a book written, I think this in Britain or in UK or whatever. I think that's might be where this guy's from, or Europe or somewhere. Anyway, so he wrote a book, and then if I remember correctly, when it came to the United States of America, they split it into 2 books because it was way too long, which I kind of agree with. Or originally it was 2 books, but then they combined it. It was something like that. So anyway, there's like Apprentice, which is book 1, and then Magician, which is book 2, or it's like Magician Apprentice and the Magician Master or something. But the one I read was just the combined, so that's what we're just going to do the whole thing in this first video. And then we're going to do Silverthorn, and then like the attack on Theron or something is the 3rd book. And then we're going to do Betrayal at Krondor and Return at Krondor. So I've already done the videos. Yep. I've already done the video for Betrayal at Krondor, so that's going to seem totally out of whack. And then Return to Krondor. No, I've already done that video too. Just because I'm like way ahead of my games and like I'm not as ahead on like the books and stuff and anime and Highlander that I'm watching and whatnot in terms of things. But in the order they'll come, so some of the conversations or things I'll mention won't make sense, or I'll be like, I'll sound more confused than I should be if I'd like read the books first, which I did not. So enjoy the complete professionality of my little stuff that I do here. But just so you know, if you're paying attention or you're following along, this will be the first thing you stumble across. So this is like your explanation of why things are kind of like wackadoo. So we'll get through the 3 books, and then we'll do those 2 games, probably interspersed between the police quest games and / SWAT, which is what I'm currently working my way through as my like. Because the way I like to do things, I like to have like a series that I'm playing through that is like 5 games at least, or at least 3 games, and then I like intersperse that with like other things so I don't get bored. Okay. So Magician Apprentice, I think that's where so the Magician. Okay. So, oops, plug this thing in so it doesn't die. All right, so we pick up with Pug. Pug is like a young 13-year-old boy who works the kitchens for Duke Barrick. He is getting some clams or something when he like gets a little. He takes a little napopotamus, and then he wakes up and he's like, "Oh, there's a storm." So he starts heading back to the keep, but then he gets stuck outside because they like locked it down at night or whatever. And then he's like, "Fuck, I guess I'll go just hang out in the woods until the morning." And then the cook will just like yell at me. And we find out the cook and the cook's wife are like his adopted parents, and then he's got this homie named Thomas, who is like his adopted brother. Essentially, they're like best friends forever and whatnot. Anyway, he gets attacked by a boar, and that may sound silly, but boars will fuck you up, man. Like, boars are like no joke. Like, dudes, you gotta take like a freaking a rifle, like a semi-automatic rifle, to hunt those things. Like, they can take it, man. Like, they're a lot more vicious than people I give them credit for. Anyway, he gets rescued by Meacham. Meacham is a hunter who works kind of directly for Colgan, who's the magician for like the dukedom and such. Anyway, so he rescues him, and then he takes him to meet Master Colgan. And while Pug is like hanging out with Master Colgan, also Master Colgan's got a fire drake. And in this world, the fire drake is like a lizard dog that I don't know if it ever spits out fire. I think it does. It doesn't really come up as like an issue, so I don't quite remember. Anyway, Pug and Colgan, they just like chat about stuff, and then Colgan kind of realizes that Pug has some like magical capabilities deep inside him. And then we get kind of like a backstory about the history of the kingdom. About the Kingdom of the Isles, how it started off, there was like the Keshian Empire, and how they eventually had like internal fighting, essentially. Like, it's kind of like, it seems like it's somewhat based off of like the Mamluks, however you say it, which were like a slave nation under one of the caliphates, and how they like revolted against their masters and made their own nation. That almost kind of seems like what the kingdom, or no, this other like thing that's going on that's like off screen. There's a quadrilogy of books that take place in like the Keshian Empire, I think, that deal with that. I don't know. I've never read it. Like, again, this is the first time I've ever read any of Raymond Feist's stuff. It's pretty good. I don't know if I'd ever read more of it. It's not high enough fantasy for me, to be completely honest. Like, and it's written well, but again, it has like so many shifting perspectives that like I had to force myself to get through it. Like, it's hard to describe my distaste for like shifting perspectives, especially. And so, like with Dragonlance, that's like a book I read a long time ago, right? So I got a lot of nostalgia for it, so it was pretty easy to get through. And also, there's a lot of magic and dragons and shit. This like barely has anything. Like, it's a lot of just dudes fighting other dudes from like other places, and then there's like some magic, but it's like, and the magic is like fantastical, and like a lot of people seem to have magic, not like a lot, but like a significant amount. It's not like there's like 3 wizards, right? But they just don't talk about it like ever, and so it's kind of like, and I don't need like magic, but I need like, there's like goblins around, and there's like a dragon. Oh, well, we'll get to all that, but it's not the point of interest at all. The point of interest in this is just kind of like the relationships between people, and they're written okay. The relationships are written okay. Generally, like I said, the book flows pretty well. It moves pretty quick. Things like make sense. Like, this guy writes fine. I read somewhere that this was like, he just decided he was going to like write a book one day. And so he's just like, okay, okie dokie. So he did it, and it like became super popular. And he's like, well, lucky me, I guess I'll just keep doing this and quit my like advertising job or whatever he did. Anyway, sorry, back to the story. So we get the history of the Kingdom of the Isles. Yeah, so the Keshian Empire, they kind of like had their little fight. They moved off. And then I already talked about that. Oh, and then like the people here rose up, and they became like the kingdom, and then the line of like kings, and then there's like a king in the east and a prince in the west who's subservient to the king of the east but kind of rules the west, and it's called the Kingdom of the Isles, but it's like big islands, I guess. There are like isles, but it's not that important. Anyway, so that wraps up kind of like chapter 1. And chapter 2, we focus on Thomas. We meet Thomas. Like I said, he's Pug's best friend. He's like the brother to him, adopted, all that stuff. We learn that there's like this time of choosing in the dukedom, so all the people who are like doing whatever, meandering about, they like practice a bunch of different things or go and like whatever, and it's like the people choose their like apprentices at this point. So all the young men, just the young men, they all come around and then they all get like apprenticed off to whoever. And so we already know that Thomas is going to be apprenticed to like the head of the guard because everyone kind of like knows that secretly. They, Pug and Thomas chat a little bit about this and the nervousness and what they're going to do, and Pug doesn't know what's going to happen to him. And then we meet Martin. Martin is the head huntsman for the Duke. And the boys are out like in the woods, and Martin's just like hanging out with the deer, petting it and stuff. And so the boys come up and they want to pet it too, and so they do. And then they talk about how Martin just came back from Elvander, which is the elven homeland. And he was there for some celebration or whatever. There's the queen of the elves. Her husband passed like a long time ago. And it seems like they finally are like done with the mourning period. So we learn more about the elves and a little bit about I really don't learn about the dwarves here. I think they get mentioned. And then they head to the choosing. And then we meet some other characters. We meet Duke Barrick. We meet his sons, Liam and Arutha, who are kind of predominant. Arutha is much more predominant in this book. Liam becomes important like at the very end. And he gets like his own like chapters of focus or whatever. We meet this like Squire Roland, who's kind of important, but kind of not. Again, it's like it's my issue with this book. It's like, okay. Okay, so then the choosing starts happening. Tomas gets picked by the head of the guard, obviously, and then no one picks Pug until the very end. And then Colgan's like, I'll take Pug. And then Pug's like, oh, thank God. I don't have to go to this like other place and be a pirate. A bit later, there's like a huge festival. There's like Dwarven Ale, meat pies and such. Thomas and Pug both meet up. They got like their fine tunics from their like, you know, the head of the guard and whatnot, so they eat and drink and whatnot. We then skip ahead a couple months. Pug is like struggling with magic. Colgan sends him out to play with the other boys to like chill for a little bit, and then he has a chat with the local priest, Tully, about magic, about the different kind of sects, how magic works for priests versus magic works for magicians, about forbidden magic and all that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, Pug's over like playing soccer or something similar to soccer with the other boys, and then he gets into a fight with Roland, and Prince Arutha has to come like save him. Thomas and him talk about girls and such, and then later on, Colgan tells him that they're going to try a new approach to magic, that the new approach is like, hey, you seem to have like a lot of natural like inclination to magic, so instead of me pushing you to do stuff that's going to be hard for you to do necessarily, like all this studying because you're like 14 years old or 13, I'm just going to let you kind of like figure it out, but you're going to have to be like in study like all day, so you're going to have time to like figure out what you want to do and kind of study your own stuff. Also, we're going to teach you how to ride a horse. Fucking sweet. A bit later, Pug is escorting the Princess Caroline when they get, and she's supposed to be like very pretty, but she's also like a 12 or 13-year-old girl. Anyway, they get attacked by trolls, and Pug is able to like tap into some of this like secret magic or whatever, and he just blasts the shit out of the trolls, which makes Caroline like instantly fall in love with him. So then they have to like, he has to escort her back to the castle. They lost the horses they were on because of the trolls, and they ran off and stuff. So he like, you know, they have a whole like moment where he's like taking her back and taking care of her and stuff. And then everyone's like super excited to have Carleen back because they were all like worried about her and Pug, except Roland, who's like the rival, because he's also in love with the princess and wants to marry her. Colgan then talks to Pug about the magic casting and what happened, and he like regales the whole court with like his story or whatever. And he says, Pug explains that he was like focusing on like a spell he read in a scroll, and that he didn't have like a magical focus, like a wand or a staff, which is like, or a holy symbol, which is very unusual. And Colgan's like, holy shit, that's not supposed to happen. And so he gets super excited about it. A bit later on, there's a huge presentation from the Duke for Pug. He makes Pug a squire, which essentially makes him like a minor noble, and then gives him land and like a title and everything. And then the princess is like super excited because she's like, yeah, no, I can fuck that guy. This is going to be great. And then the Duke takes Pug aside on his own and talks about his responsibilities, because Pug's like, he was a fucking orphan, right? And so now he has all these responsibilities, and he has to like rule a house and have staff and stuff, and, you know, figure all that stuff out. So they're going to help tutor him on how to do all that as well, because this Duke Barrick is like legit one of the best. Like, he's like the most high fantasy thing about this book is how much Duke Barrick is like a man of the people for being like the third most powerful person in like the whole kingdom. We find out later. So then a bit later, Thomas wakes Pug up and he's like, hey, there's a shipwreck, we gotta go, because apparently like when there's a shipwreck, it's like first come first serve. And then Pug's like, I don't know, man, I'm like a duke, I'm like a squire now, I can't be just like fucking around, I don't want to embarrass the duke's household. And they're like, well, and so Thomas finally talks him into it by being like, well, since you represent the duke, you gotta go make sure the duke's interests are like in line and there's not like looting too much. And Pug's like, okay, yeah, that's good, I can sell it that way. So they head over there, and it looks like the ship looks like completely crazy. Like they Critty, which is like the capital where they all live, there is like no there's a dock, right? So it's right on the water, but no one's ever seen they've never seen these boats like that, and they see some dead bodies that look bizarre too. And then at some Pug point, Pug feels drawn to a chest, and then he finds a scroll inside the ship. And then while they're in there, the ship starts to like break apart, so they escape. And when they get out, they find like one of the strange men that it looks unrecognizable is like around. And so he starts gibber jabbing in some language they don't understand. And then there's like the Duke's horse or the Duke's men roll up in some horses, and the guy like fucking flips out. And then he passes out, and then so he gets captured. So we later find out that we're at the Duke's place, and he's talking to Colgan and Tully. And they're talking about the ship, about the guy. The priest is like, I'm going to mind link, which is one of his powers, with the prisoner, so I can like see what's going on. And then Colgan's like, I'm going to go check out the scroll that Pug felt drawn to. After a little bit, Tully comes back and he's like, oh, the man died. But he's from a different world. They were just like traveling at sea, and then something happened, and then they like rifted over to this world. And like, yeah, rift magic is a thing that does exist, so fair enough. And then everyone died except for like this guy. And then elsewhere, Pug goes to check on Colgan. Oh no, and then Pug's standing there, and it's like, hey, it's been a minute. Can you go check on Colgan? So he goes to check on Colgan, and then when he gets to the door, he feels like super weird about it, and he tries to break down the door, but he can't, so he has to get some guys to come help him. And when they bust in, they see a rift with some hands reaching for Colgan, who's kind of like knocked out. And so Pug runs up and grabs a spear and just like chucks it into the rift. And at that point, the hands disappear, and then the rift disappears. After Colgan recovers, he talks about the magic. And it mentions that the scroll was a note from a people called the Tsunani. It's from one of these guys to like his wife, something about a warlord and a council and a bridge they constructed. And the Duke becomes like super concerned, as he should, because if there's a bridge to this world from this other world, they could easily like attack, and they don't seem like on super good terms. Anyway, at that same time, they get a message that the Elf Queen wants to come and visit Critty. A bit later, Pug and Thomas are getting excited to see the elves, right? It's like something they talked about. It's not something you usually see. And then the princess is purposely like ignoring Pug because, boys, am I right? So she's like purposely flirting with Roland in front of Pug to make him jealous or something. And then Pug's like, I gotta go to this feast, yada yada. And Thomas is like, I really want to see the princess or the queen of the elves. And so Pug's like, well, I got a +1. You want to be my +1? And Thomas is like, hell yeah. So they go and make sure that's okay. And they're like, yeah, if he's coming with Pug, you just gotta eat right and sit right and not be like a kitchen boy, you asshole. So they head over there. Let's see. And Thomas is immediately enamored by the queen of the elves. Like, he is like got so much lust for her, it is out of control. And then Pug starts to get a little jealous of Kaladin, who's the prince of the elves, because he's like flirting with Carline, or at least that's the way he takes it. And at the dinner, they created all the and then he has to like he tells the queen and everybody else the tale about the trolls and about the ship and everything that's going on. And then we hear the elves reveal that they've had interactions with the Suani as well, and they've had men just like disappear into the forest. A bit later, after the feast, Pug meets up with Prince Kalen, and they talk about the Dark Elves, the Moradel, as well as the kingdom generally, and how he looks like he's Pug's age, like he looks like he's 15, 16, but he's like 120 years old, and how his mother is almost past the mourning period. Oh, okay, so I don't know what the celebration was, because it was like a year at least of mourning after this guy died, and that she's going to start taking suitors soon. So they chat a little bit about Thomas, his friend, and then the princess, and he's like, so you and the princess? And then Kalen's like, no, you and the princess, motherfucker. And then Pug's like, what? And he's like, bro, let me fill you in. I've got 120 years of experience with bitches. let me help you out here. The next day, Colgan tells Pug that he's departing for Krondor with the Duke, and that Tomas is coming as well. So Pug's going with them, and then Tomas is coming as well. And so Pug gets a letter from the princess, and she's like, meet me here at this time. And he's like, okay. So he shows up, but then Roland's there as well. And so they get into like a fight, right? They start bickering and fighting. And then Pug almost like draws on his like magic, like the stuff he used against the trolls to kill Roland, but then he's able to like push it down. And then eventually like boys will be boys, and they're just like, they start laughing, and they're all dirty and messed up. And then the princess shows up, and she gets super mad because like, I'm a princess, the fuck you guys doing? You're supposed to be here respectfully waiting quietly, not fighting or doing this other shit. So she storms off, and then Roland's like, you want to go drink? And he's like, sure. So on the way they run into Thomas, who fucked up like the day before because he like left his sword somewhere and lost it, and then like the commander of the guard like found it and was like, ooh, someone's gonna get their ass handed to him. So he's getting like some real basic training, like re-education kind of shit. And they're like, hey, just meet us later for drinks. And he's like, all right. So they go. They have like a grand old time. They tell stories and they drink and whatnot. And then later on that evening, Pug gets awoken because the princess is in his room. And so they talk about how they like each other. And then he confesses to her that magic right now is his like first priority because that's what he needs to do and learn and all this stuff. But he does have feelings. And then they make out. And then they think about like having sex, but then they decide to hold off because they're 14 fucking years old. Until he's a little older and he gets stuff figured out. So she agrees and leaves. The next day, Colgan and the priest are arguing about books or some old shit. When the priest leaves Colgan, he points out that the fireplace thing... and so then we learned that like Pug got tired of like cooking in like the wizard's tower and like filling up with smoke or whatever, so he created some sort of like thing he read about. Like essentially invented like a chimney, like a modern age chimney, and that it's done. And so he goes and like gets that set up and whatnot, and then Colgan's like, hey, so what happened with you and Carline last night? And then Pug's like, how'd you know? And he's like, bro, you live like directly above me. You guys are not quiet. And he's like, from what I heard, you made the right decision. And Pug tells him, and he's like, all right, you made the right decision. You don't want to be fucking no princesses before we're headed out of here. And then like, hey, no more late night visits, motherfucker. And then, a little bit later, the group gets ready. So it's like the Duke, a bunch of his men, Prince Arutha. I think Arutha was part of the group. Colgan, Thomas, and Pug are all getting ready to leave. The princess hugs Pug, and they like talk about how they like each other, and like, oh, it's adorable. They're like 14. And then there's some like weird issue with horses that they have to deal with, where like Thomas isn't used to riding a horse or something, and Pug's got to do that or whatever. So anyway, they head out. On their way, they meet Martin again and some of his hunters, and they're going to help get... the reason they're heading out, they're going to head out to the prince to get help with like the Suani thing that's going on. And instead of like sending a ship because it's like winter or something and it's like really dangerous, that they're going to like ride through the mountains. But that should be fine. They're just going to, it's like a trip. So they all got to get together, and they need guards because there's like goblins and Moradel and other kind of strange shit out there. And speaking of Moradel, they get like jumped. Their asses get jumped. And so they get into this huge like brawl with the dark elves, and there's like and there's like magic, and there's a lot of running and all this stuff. And it's a huge mess. They lose like half the guards, right? And then Colgan uses some weather magic to like fog up the place so they can escape because they got like the Moradel that are here like overwhelmingly more. And then a couple days go by, and it's like they need to get shelter or die because it's starting to like snow and stuff. And they eventually find this like cavern, and they've been like eating delicious horse meat and all this stuff. And then the goblins like rush in, and they have to kill them. And after they defeat them, they start talking about how the goblins are acting very irrationally. Like normally, like 5 goblins would not attack like 20 men in like a cave full of like a situation, but so they must be desperate. Something must be going on. And then another figure jumps into the cave and is like, "Yo!" And everyone's like, "Ah!" And it's Dolgan. Who's Dolgan? He's the head of some clan of dwarfs. And so they're friends. They all rest up and discuss what to do next. The pathway to Krondor, which is where the prince is like covered with snow, so that's not going to happen. And then also there's still the Moradil that are out and about doing stuff, and so they talk about heading back to Crete and going by sea, but that's not a good idea either, as we mentioned before. So now Dolgan is like, hey, there's a mine here that we can get through, and it should be fine. And they're like, okay, let's do that. It sounds the best. So the group with like the injured and whatnot are going to go to Caldera, which is like the Dwarven home where this guy's like the boss, to rest. And then the Duke, along with Dolgan, Colgan, and Thomas and Pug and a few others will head through the mines, and Arutha too, so they can proceed on to Krondor, which is just like on the other side. So they head inside, they see a whole bunch of like beautiful murals and stuff, and then a wraith shows up, and it's like, goddamn fucking wraith. And so they have to run away because there's like no way for them to defeat them. And at some point they like get to safety and they realize Thomas is gone. And so we switch over to his perspective, and we see him like running away and stumbling in the dark for a while and surviving by thinking about how he wants that sweet elven queen pussy. And then eventually he finds like a safe place, like on like a little ledge where he can like rest. Back with Pug and company, they finally make it to like the end of the cavern so they can head on to Krondor. And Dolgan's like, hey, I'm gonna go check on Thomas, see if we can find him just in case he survived. And he reveals that like part of being a dwarf is like Dungeons and Dragons dwarving, which is like an old skill dwarfs used to have before the game got kind of gay. Anyway, so he eventually finds Thomas, and Thomas is just like fucking hanging out with some ancient gold dragon, and the dragon's like, what up, homie? And the dwarf's like, hello, my lord. And it's like, they think about dwarfs like, dragons are usually evil. This guy's like friendly as shit. So they're all kicking it, talking and stuff, and he's like, oh, hey, my old friend Macros used to come here all the time, and he left me some shit, but I want you guys to use this scroll, which is just going to kill me, and make me like disappear, so that like these assholes evil things and evil creatures can't come and like the kobolds or whatever, and come and use my like corpse for shit, like evil wizards or whatnot. And so they do that, and they open the chest, and then Dolgan finds like the ancient hammer of like the Dwarven kings, which makes him like the leader of the Dwarves, kind of like Dragonlance. If you listen to me talk about that. And then there's a bunch of like delicious gold armor and like a magic looking sword. And so Thomas puts it on. He's like, hey, it fits super well. In fact, it fits so well because it's magic and it kind of like fits itself to him. So that's not sketchy in it at all. Oh man. So they're all pretty psyched about it. Let's see. Oh, they head to the caldera, and when they get to the wraith, they're able to like drive it off. I don't remember if they killed it or not. And then they get to the caldera, and they're going to camp there for the winter. Pug and crew get picked up by some rangers on the other side, like headed to Krondor, and taken to like a free city port. And this is like much bigger than Pretty. Or no, sorry, not Pretty, Crete. And Pug is like, wow, I've only lived in Crete, but this is like, there's so many people here and all this crazy stuff. And so there's like the kingdom cities, which the princehood falls under, and then there's like free cities, which don't belong to the kingdom, and they kind of have their own things going, and they're usually ran by like merchants and whatnot. But besides being much bigger, it's less regal, right? Anyway, so the Duke meets with a contact there about the Suani, and then the guy agrees to give him their best ship so they can take the ship from here, which I guess is safer to get down to Krondor, which is also on the ocean. Unfortunately, there's a huge storm, and so they get knocked over to this place called Sorcerer's Isle so they can fix up the ship. And while there, they meet this Macross guy who's like the most powerful super mage of all time. Anyway, Macross does the whole like Fizzband thing and pretends to be like a doddering old guy, but then at some point after he like takes off, they realize that he is actually Macross, and Colgan's like very honored that he got to sit in his presence or something. Macross. Oh, and then yeah. So they finally arrive at the prince's court, and then Pug meets the princess Areti, I think, something like that. And she's super adorable because she's like 8, right? And then she is like in love with Arutha, who's like, I think supposed to be like 16, 17 right now, so he's a bit older. He's a younger prince, right? So Liam's like the prince, like the crown prince. Anyway, so we learned that there's some issue with the king not allowing the prince his normal authority over the armies in the west, and they talk a little bit, Duke and the prince talk a little bit about it, but the prince is like real fucking sick, right? And then we learn, I don't know if we learn here, anyway, so Duke Barrick's like, well, I guess I gotta take my little entourage here and go see the king to get help with the Suani and see what's going on with that. So then they head out after having like a party and all that fun stuff. And on the way, they get like distracted because they like run into bandits, and they end up staying with like when they get to like the east, which is where like the king is like directly in charge of normally, and the way this kingdom's set up, they run into a duke who's like an old friend of Barrick's. And then Pug learns that there's some issues with like the succession and all this stuff, and this was hinted at before, but essentially Duke Barrick was like him and the current king are like cousins, but Duke Barrick had like, he technically should have been like the king or at least the prince, but he didn't want it because he just wanted to stay in Crete with his like wife. Oh, and there's a whole thing with his wife died a long time ago too, and he's always stayed single. It doesn't come up that much, that's why I forgot about it. But he so there's that whole thing, and that he like decided to like let it pass to like Roderick, I think is the king, and that was like a huge mistake. And this guy's like, hey man, there's like, they go somewhere where they can't be overheard by anybody because he doesn't trust people in his own court, because like, and then there's like Black Tom or whatever his name is. I think his name's Greedy or something. Guy, that's what it is. Duke Guy, who's like another cousin of Barrick, and he also has like some claim to the throne as well. But he's been essentially manipulating King Roderick by feeding him like a lot of paranoia and like moving into his like good graces. And clearly King Roderick has some like mental health issues, probably because of all the inbreeding and whatnot. And he's not gotten married. There's no heir. So if he dies, it would like kick back to Barrick as like the next in line, and then one of his sons. And so Guy's trying to like usurp that by dealing with that. So it's like a pretty crazy deal and all that stuff. Anyway, so the Duke like begs for his help in like the whole situation. Like the other Duke begs Barrick and then warns him to be careful. The next chapter picks up, and we are heading into like the kingdom capital, and it's like super impressive. And the king is like, he's like I wrote fop. What was I trying to say with that? Oh yes, yeah, it's very foppish. Like he's like taking extra money from all the people so he can like make more beautiful statues and stuff. And the people are like hungry and having issues, and there's like been a lot of problems with taxes and whatnot. And anyway, so they go. Duke Barrick goes to meet with the king, and he's like heard of Pug's exploits and the troll thing, and he wants to talk to him about that. And then the Duke and King meet, and that does not go well at all. And it doesn't go bad. It's just like nothing bad happens. The King's just like, I don't know. I'm not sure. That should be a thing. Let me think about it. I need some more time. It's like that kind of thing, right? Anyway, so then he summons Pug because he wants to hear Pug's like crazy story. So Pug comes in and tells him about it, and he also wants to know about Carline because they're cousins, and he wants to like marry her because of incest and whatnot. And Rutrow, that could spell bad things for Pug. Anyway, the King wants to talk to Guy more about making up his mind because again Guy's kind of like manipulated him through trickery to like rely on him and whatnot, and so Duke Barrick's like, we gotta get the fuck out of here, this is crazy. Like if Guy takes over, there's gonna, like, if something happens, it's gonna be like civil war. This is like very bad. And so they have a pretty good plan about what they're gonna do and how they're gonna execute on the next steps. Like there's this whole like Game of Thrones section going on where they just like him and his like counselors and the prince, and they all talk about, and Colgan, and they all talk about different maneuverings and how they can like, you know, manipulate the king and how they can like get Guy out of the way and all this stuff. And they're like, all right, that sounds good, let's do that. And as soon as they do it, they get word that the Suwannee have attacked the West. And so the king is like mad. And so he's like, Duke Barrick, you're in charge of the armies of the West. Go take care of this. And everyone's like, well, that was easy. And this is one of those things where I'm like, that's bad writing, bro. Like that should have happened before they had the whole conversation. They should have started talking about it and it got interrupted. Like you wasted like so much time having like this plan put together and people getting alternative plans and having discussions, and then immediately you're just like, no, that was important. And it's like, that's not good writing, dude. And it's his first book, so it's kind of like, it's fine. But there's a couple instances like that in this book where it's like, what the fuck was that? Anyway, it's not common, but like I said, there's a few instances where I'm like, what? Anyway, so he sends them back immediately to take care of that, and Pug's like, cool, I'm excited to go see my girlfriend Carline. And then Colgan's like, nope, you're you're a noble and like the secondary mage in the Duke's army, so you are fucking going to war. And he's like, wah wah wah. Anyway, so we skip ahead 2 months, and the war's been going on this whole time with no end in sight. The Suwannee keeps summoning more and more guys. Eventually, Colgan figures out that they are protecting a summoning device in a certain area, so it makes sense to go like try to take that out. Now, this is discovered while Colgan and Pug are just like out and about during the war, so they feel like they got to rush back to Barrick with that information because maybe they can make a concentrated effort. They can destroy whatever this summoning device is. And they also discuss how like the Sunari are all fighting with like petrified wood, essentially. Like they're not, or stone. They're not really using metal. And if they are, it's like kind of more rare. So there's got to be something to do with like the reason they're here is to get resources or whatnot. So they're doing their run back, and they run into some Suwannee mages, and they're like super fucking strong. So at that point, Colgan's trying to fight some of them, and then there's like a whole mismatch, and like the whole like running party gets kind of like fucked up because the mages and everything else that's going on. And Pug gets knocked out and captured, and then he wakes up and he's in Suwannee captivity. And then he gets like interviewed by like a mage, and like all the mages are like known as they call them like the Great Ones, and they also call them like the Black Robes or whatnot. So the guy kind of knows the language that they're speaking, and so he gets called clever, but he gets like warned that like being clever is going to get you killed or whatever because now he's a slave. Dun dun dun. Elsewhere, Tomas is fighting with the dwarves, and he's doing fucking great. Like this armor and this sword and his natural abilities and his training or whatnot, he is like he's killing the shit out of like these guys. He's doing very, very good. Eventually, he gets word that the Suwannee are trying to take the mines, and so they set up this big ambush, and they learn that at this point, during the ambush, they find that the Suwannee have like these allies, and these allies are like giant ant-like creatures. And so with the help of them, the dwarves are getting like pushed back out of the mines, and they're even making some inroads into like the Elven Forest, we find out. At this point, Thomas starts having like hallucinations while he's sleeping. Like he starts having these like crazy dreams about a different people, a different time. He's like a guy who's like riding a dragon and all this stuff, and it just seems like bizarre. And he's seeing lots of stuff with like elves and stuff like that, and like the Vernu, something like that. Is what he keeps getting called, which we later come to find out that's like the pre-elf before. We'll get to it in a second, but it has to do with the elves. Like this other race is like elf adjacent, if you will. but he's having all these like crazy dreams and stuff, and he's kind of like losing himself in his head a little bit, and he kind of thinks that it's somehow related to the armor that he's wearing, but the armor is great, so he's not going to take it off. In fact, he sleeps with it. Right? Nothing sketchy about that. So he's definitely kind of losing it, and eventually the dwarves, led by Dolgan, and Thomas, they flee to Elvandor, and then the queen. When the queen and some of her ministers see Thomas show up with like the armor and everything, they get like very interested in the whole situation and also a little concerned. But they decide they're going to hold up. The dwarves are going to hold up here at Elvandor, and that they're going to be able to like hold the Suwannee at like the river pass or whatever. So they're able to do that for like quite some time, it seems, because of like the magic that is inherent in like the Elven Forest and everything else that's going on with that. Yep. And so then they rest with the elves and plan their next steps. All right, so it's been 3 years, and the war has been going on continually. Arutha's back in Crete, and he's mad because he should be in charge of like the army here, but he's not because his dad doesn't trust him. So it's gone to Fanon, I think, is the sword master. I think that's his name. He discusses this with some guys, and then Caroline, the princess, talks with Roland about his feelings and her feelings. And it's been 3 years since Pugbin's gone, and that she still believes he's alive. And they are having an argument about this. A bit later, Martin and his rangers bring in some Suwannee prisoners. They're all like slaves they got from like a group of them. And then the priest, Father Tully, who's been studying the Suwannee language, is able to talk to them. And they find out that one of these guys, who they call Charles, he's got some like Suwannee name. And the Suwannee are kind of like a mix between Asian cultures, right? And the Keshin are like kind of Middle Eastern, North African. All right. So they find out he's a fallen noble, and we get some information about how like the noble system and the Grand Council and all that stuff. But eventually he swears allegiance to Arutha, and that he'll be his man, and he does, and he kind of learned the language, and there's like a lot of stuff going on with all that business as well. A bit later, there's like a huge storm coming in, and so there's a lot of concerns, and everyone's trying to get people inside to protect like the village and all that stuff. And then Caroline and Roland, they make up, and they talk about how they can be friends and yada yada. Elsewhere, a ship comes in, but there's like the lighthouse is down for whatever reason, and so the prince comes out because there's like the storm going on to light it so the ship doesn't like crash or anything like that. And then when he gets over there, he gets attacked by some black robe figures, and then he notices that some of his men are killed, so he fights them. So because they like hop on the ship or something. Anyway, he fights them to a door, and then he trips and falls in the water, and then he uses the water to sneak around and hide from them, kind of like Assassin's Creed style. And all these black-garbed figures are like rushing into the town and all this stuff, and he's like, I gotta warn everybody. Because he sees some of these figures on the ship as well. So he rushes to the lighthouse and relights the flame, and then he sets like the warning signal from the lighthouse, so all the people in the guards or in the castle can come out and fight, and they hear like this alarm from the castle. And so he's like, thank goodness. So he's struggling, but he's trying to keep his head down, and he needs to get a sword and get into town. So he heads up to the ship, and he finds a bunch of dead seamen along with one live guy, the captain, Amos. And the ship turns on fire, and so they both escape into the town. And at that point, the prince passes out. He wakes up a little bit later inside the keep, and he's alive. Hey, the captain saved him. And we learn that the captain's ship got boarded a while ago by these black robe figures, and they killed everybody and kind of took over. And that this was all part of like the Suwannee's plan of attack, because they're going to come and like siege here soon. And so Arutha brings Amos on board his retinue, and then he kind of falls asleep. We get a whole nother year of like nothing happening, I guess. There's just like random wars and stuff. And then Princess Carleen is like sexy as fuck now, apparently. There's like a whole page and a half about like how beautiful she is and stuff. And she's learning swordsmanship from Roland just in case, and they finally kiss because they've been like flirting with each other a lot lately. And then the Suwannee attack begins. So Arutha and his men, they comment. We get a lot of commentary in the battle, like they're coming up, they're doing weird stuff, they only attack at night, but they attack the front gate. Like there's like four gates in the keep, and they're laying siege, but they only attack like the one gate, and then they like come out, like make announcements, and they're like very honorable in how their dealings and stuff. And this goes on for like several days, and eventually Fanon, the swordmaster, gets injured, so Arutha has to take over because his second in command, the horsemaster, is like a terrible commander, and everyone knows it, including the horsemaster. So he's like, thank God someone is taking control. And so they're able to hold off for all this time, and they're like, God damn, how much longer are we going to be able to hold on for this? And somebody's like, maybe a week or two, because the Suwannee just seem like they're endless. And so the siege continues to go on for another couple of weeks. I think it's 14 days at this point. And then Martin was sent out, And what he's been doing is he's been getting the Mortarel are like fleeing the south to the north because of the Suwani as well, and so they're like leading the Suwani or the Mortarel into each other so they can fight, just to kind of give them some breathing room and whatnot. At some point, a rat catcher alerts Arutha that sappers have been coming in through the rear wall because, he's a rat catcher, and so he's underground and he's figuring all this stuff out. So Roland takes his men down to the cellar and to defend the women, and then Arutha takes a huge group and they're going to go out to like the courtyard and like collapse the tunnel. And then we get some information about the walls, the way they're designed and how they're like shaped, is that normally like sappers would try to collapse the wall, but for some reason these walls can't be collapsed, or if they do, they'll like kill everybody inside, so it's not going to like work. Like they're specifically designed to stop this, which I never heard anything about that, but that might be like a real life thing. Okay. So meanwhile, Carlene's in the cellar with the women and children and stuff, and they get surprised because some Suwani guys start coming through the ground, and so she gets like her sword and she like kills them and a few more, and then Roland and his men like bust in and they just like leap down in the hole and start fighting. At the same time, Arutha and his crew get into the tunnels in the back end, and they come rushing to the other side, and so they're trying to collapse the tunnels and like smoke the whole thing out and everything, and eventually they get that done. And like Roland's okay, and Carline's okay, and they lost some men, but it's all like red shirts and whatnot, so it doesn't really matter. And then as they like collapse the tunnels and all that stuff, they see a bunch of ships, like all the reinforcements that they sent word that they needed are showing up. And then they see the Suwani also probably noticing the ships, and they're retreating from the siege. So then Roland and Carline stop in the wall. They talk about how they won the battle, but it's not over for good. And then meanwhile, we finally get like the Suwani perspective. So over in the camp, this war leader named Kasumi, he reads a letter from his father. It's all about the Shinsawai clan, something like that. They're like the blue circles or something. He thinks about how he considers these people barbarians, but they're very crafty for barbarians. They're uncivilized and all this stuff. And he reflects on how the people are Creedy and their leaders, and he like looks through each one. He's like, there's that prince guy with the blonde hair or whatever, and yada yada yada, or the black. I think he's blonde. I can't remember. Anyway, and then he thinks about like politics back home and the council, and how there's like a war leader, and how his family is like one of the major clans, and how they like backed out at the last of the war because it's like political. Like there's this huge war going on because like this guy, the war leader, wants to do this battle to like gain honor, but then he's from an opposing clan in like the blue circle where Kasumi's family's from, essentially. And so there's like a whole thing about how there's like maneuverings with the council and with the emperor and all this stuff to like dishonor the war leader with his family, and how so they're pulling out, and then the war leader can't conduct like a war here because he doesn't have enough people, if he doesn't have like a united force or whatever. And then he's like, this is a very bold move. I guess we'll see how it plays out. And so he heads back through the rift to his family, which ends book one. Not the whole book one, sorry. I think it ends. As I mentioned before, this was originally, this is like broken into two books, essentially, right? I think there's only two books. So this first part, I think, is supposed to be Magician Apprentice, and then the Magician Master is like the next book, which starts here, where it's like book two, and then we'll pick up going forward with that. So book two picks up here with Pug. He's over in the Suwani lands, and he's been a slave for several years now. He's out getting like wood, and then the slave master is like, hey, cut down that tree. And while Pug's up there, he's like, hey man, this is a bad call, that's a bad tree. And he's like, I will beat the shit out of you, cut down that tree. And he's like, okay. So he starts cutting it down, and then the tree like collapses, almost kills a bunch of slaves, almost kills Lori, his Pug's new homie, and almost kills Pug and stuff. And then the overseer gets super mad, and he's about to come over and beat the shit out of Pug when the master of the house, or the master of this whole thing, like the actual master, comes over and he's like, the fuck is going on here? And he is not too happy at the overseer, because the overseer is trying to blame Pug, and he's like, no man, that motherfucker like saved that other slave and yada yada and all this stuff, like, and he yells at him for a little bit, and then he is like, hey, you two, you're injured, the Lori, the friend, and the other guy, you guys come with me. And so then they get told, while they're kind of like resting up, that they're going to get moved over to the household because they're smart and they're not just like dumbass barbarian slaves. Like for being barbarians, they're pretty wily and whatnot. And it's, hey, he's in the Shinzawa clan, which makes sense because that's the ones who are fighting Creedy, and that's where kind of Pug was, I guess. Which is fun. So then they get taken to like the big boss's house in the clan, and they get to see, as soon as they get there, they're like, oh, it looks like we're moving somewhere else, because everyone's like packing shit up and whatnot. And then Pug catches the eye of this like very, very sexy lady slave, which is nice. So after the pack up, they head out to like the big master's house, the head of the clan, because this guy who is like the master here is like one of the sons of this guy, so Kasumi's brother presumably. So they run into Kasumi on the way, right? The other brother. And he like rides up on a horse, and he's very, very bad at it. And Pug and Lori are like, the fuck, he's really bad. But then they get, and it's just kind of funny, and they kind of like chit chat, or Pug kind of thinks about all that stuff. So then they get brought over. They finally get to like the clan master's house, Kasumi's and this other guy's father, and they talk about they can kind of speak the language, and they can speak the language of the people they're trying to invade, and then like Pug knows how to play chess, which is like very impressive to like the master of the house because he loves chess, and it seems like chess might have come from here or something because they play it exactly the same way. And then essentially he's like, I want you to teach my son Kasumi how to like ride horses, and then you can come play chess with me, and then you guys are going to be treated like higher level slaves, but still slaves. So then Pug and Lori hang out with Kasumi a lot, and they like teach him how to speak the language, how to ride horses, and they kind of become friends. And then Pug finally, after being like a little bitch and thinking about Caroline and just having like being very wishy-washy, ends up hooking up with the slave lady. God, what's her name? It's like Naita, I think is her name. And she's a Suwani like ex-noble, and they finally like get together and make out, and then they have sex like pretty quick. And then he really wants to get married to her, and so he talks to Kasumi about it, and that Kasumi like warns him that it's not going to work, and so he should shut the fuck up and just do what he's told. And he gets kind of mad about it. Let's see, something to do with it. Oh, and Pug talks to her about like how she used to belong to another clan, like a noble house, and how they got overthrown, and that's how she got put in slavery, which is the same story that kind of happened with Charles over with Rutha. Like, so that could and so they kind of speculate that maybe there's or Pug speculates in his head that could possibly have something to do with it, or maybe there's some wheeling and dealing and stuff like that. He doesn't know. But they're getting pretty comfortable with Kasumi and with everything that's going on, like playing chess, and Lori's doing like music and their horse riding stuff, and they're even like learning how to fight with him or training him how to fight in like their stuff. And then there's like we learn a little bit about these like mounds and the ants and all that stuff, and there's a raid from these ants. Like, but we find out that like they have like a bunch of men, right? Like more men than like women or something. And so then there's like a mating season, and the men who get rejected from the mating season get kind of like kicked out of the organization or something like that. There's like too many of them. I don't know. It doesn't go into like a whole lot of detail about it. But so then they go on like a rampage because they're so angry or something. And so this like happens periodically. So they have to go help, like they rescue the horses, and Pug and Lori do a really good job like helping out the clan, like subside these guys, and then kind of like helping them get everything back into order. And Kasumi's like, ha, that was kind of funny. And then we learn more about like the politics of the realm or the empire and all that stuff. And then we learn more about the Great Ones. The Great Ones are the wizards, and they're kind of like outside of politics. And they're like, everyone treats them like with a lot of reverence and stuff. And then one day, Lori, he crafts a lute, and he practices playing, and the Lord wants to hear him play, and he's having a visit from one of these Great Ones. So we found out this Great One used to be, or he is one of Kasumi's like uncles, like his mother's sister or his father's sister or brother. So he visits a lot, right? But technically he's not part of the clan anymore. Technically you're supposed to just defer to him no matter what, and right? So it's kind of awkward. And then so Lori's playing like a song from like his homeland and like his home language, where he gets pretty sad and he starts missing home, and he's sad about like his marriage to Nikita being shut down. And so he uses like some magical technique to help him stay calm and not get too emotional and whatnot. And then the Great One's like, everyone stop! What the fuck's going on with that guy over there? And everyone's like, the fuck? And so he runs over, and he tries to do like a mind read with Pug, and Pug like pushes him out. And the Great One's like, he is now part of the... Wait, hold on. He is now property of the assembly. I am taking him right now. And everyone's like, okay. Because again, the Great Ones are so predominant in like society that even this guy's a slave like this clan, any Great One can just be like, nope, he's mine now. He's coming with me. And so that's what they do. And so they head out. Meanwhile, all that fun Pug stuff's going on with him going to be a mage and whatnot. We head back over to Elvander, and so the Prince of the Elves, Callan, and his mother are talking about Tomas. There's an issue. The armor is from... At first I thought it was like Mordorel, whatever, the Dark Elves, but it's from like the Vanu or something, who are like the precursor to both the Elves and the Mordorel, or Mordredel. And Dolgan overhears this, and he intercedes, and they start talking. They talk about Tomas some more, about how the armor is filled with evil, but Thomas is such like a pure boy that maybe he can control the darkness or overcome the darkness or something. They review kind of the history between the elves and the Moradel, how they broke up, how they were like all the stuff that went on with that, and how sometime along the way the gods brought the humans and the dwarfs to this world, so they're not from this world either. They got rifted over here, so this is like originally like an elven land in this entire world that they exist in. So they're super concerned, and then the queen like admits to herself that she's in love with Thomas, which is what Thomas always wanted, so that's great, because he's also in love with her, which could be a problem. The prince is like super concerned because of succession crises and stuff, and like the will of the people. Anyway, Thomas is still having fun though. He's having like tons of battles, and then he's having lots of like hallucinations about fighting dragons and the ancient elf wars and stuff. And so it's this whole chapter is a little confusing, not gonna lie, because it keeps going back and forth between like Thomas leading forces in to fight the Suwani, while at the same time he's like dreaming about fighting like elves and riding a dragon and stuff. And then at some point he gets Martin shows up and he gets caught up in like Critty's situation. I think it was Martin. Then he decides he needs to grab a black robe mage from the Suwani so they can figure out what's going on with that. At that juncture, Macros shows up. Yep, Macros. And he's like, up, not yet, but I will help you. So he kicks the shit out of the Suwani with the help of the elves, obviously, but Macros does a lot of the heavy lifting there. And then Thomas goes into one of his like pass spells, and he hears like a voice speaking directly to him. And it's like the voice inside the armor, and then he wakes up from it, and the queen is there, and she's like super turned on because she was like repairing one of his like wounds from the battle while he was kind of like passed out having hallucinations or whatever. And it's like, hey girl, and she's like, what up? And so they fuck. We then skip forward like an indeterminate amount of time. I think it's 2 years, but it could just be 1 year. And an unknown, and now we get introduced to this strange young man who's obviously Pug, who's in a white robe and he hasn't spoken in years, quote unquote. And then because there's no talking, and you have to be completely obedient while in the white robes, because that's what the black robe said. And at some point they like stole all his memories away to force him to concentrate on developing his magical capabilities and whatnot. And then every now and then he gets tested, and so he always fails, and then they're just like, we'll try again later. And so this time he gets tested again, someone enters his mind and something different happens this time, and instead of being like you fail, they just like get quiet. And so then he goes to mealtime and he's sitting, and at some point he feels like he can go and move past this point, so he walks up to one of the black robes and he says, I know who I am. And they're like, good, come this way. So they take him and they walk to a door and they're like, open it. And then Pug is about to like reach over and grab it, but he's like, no, that is incorrect. So then he uses magic to command the door to open, and then the door opens and they head inside, and the black robe guy is like, good job, you passed the final test. And it's like, if you had opened it with your hands, you'd be dead. He then gets a name. Miliber, I think it's Miliber or something. The audiobook sounds like Melba, but I like looked it up and I think it's Miliber. Anyway, he goes into some sort of trance where he sees like the whole history of this world. It starts with some crazy like these bug races and some other people, and they were having wars and conquering and stuff, and then a rift open, and the Suwani and like other races from this world like entered, and they were being chased by some evil force, and then the evil force couldn't get through because like the rift wasn't big enough. And then eventually the Suwani like took over the whole world. They made the empire. And also at some point, the wizards did something to like bring another sun closer so that they could have like a better life or not have winter or something. Anyway, and then they also made a rift. And then when the adversary who was chasing him in the first place saw the rift, he was like, oh boy, here I go. And he tries to enter the world, but again, the rift's not big enough. And so they close that shit down like real hard. And then we get some more history with like the empire and how the empire started. So there, originally it was just like the Suwani like took over everything, and then they like united as an empire. And then we learned that it was along with all the rifts and the closing out the adversary and stuff, that the Black Rose became like a separate entity away from all the politics of like the courts and the council and all that stuff. And the reason why was that they need to be able to protect the world from the adversary, which is like the true enemy. So all the political maneuvering can just be like for funsies. But then the Black Robes overall it's like they're all playing a game, like they're all kids playing a game, and then the Black Robes are like the adults, and so the adults have like ultimate jurisdiction over like everything, and the kids are just like, yes, master, whatever you would like. And it's like, can we go back to killing each other and fighting wars? And then the Black Robes are like, I don't give a fuck what you do. And then he finds out, so he chats with like his new teacher, like Harkonis or something. I know it's not Harkonis, that's like from Dune, but it's like Harkuba or something. Anyway, he finds out that the council, which is the political body, is concerned about him. The assembly is concerned about him, which is the mage council. I know, confusing. And then there's like the political council. Anyway, so they talk about two different kinds of magic. There's the upper and lower path. The upper path is kind of like wizards from Dungeons & Dragons, while the lower path is like sorcerers from Dungeons & Dragons, where they like learn magic and they can kind of be studious. But the upper path is like super studious, and they're much more concentrated and more powerful and whatnot. And those with the upper path can also utilize like a lot of the lower path. But so there's some advantages to being in the lower path, is that it's like more wild magic and more random stuff can happen. And it's kind of centered around like, do you do research and read books or not? Anyway, Pug has a connection. Pug is super strong because not only does he have magical capabilities from the world like Middenkind or whatever, the original world, but he also has magical connection to like the mana sources from this world or whatever. So he's like double as strong. But the Pug knows that, but the Black Robes don't. but they are concerned because of his like loyalties and some of that kind of other stuff. Anyway, there's been multiple votes about like maybe we should just kill this motherfucker, and it keeps losing. And then finally they had a vote recently that was like a tie vote, and it's like the final vote, I guess. And what happens is this teacher who's teaching him, he's the only guy who didn't vote. So at some point, whenever he feels like it, he can vote, and he can either vote that Pug's good to go or that Pug needs to die. And so Pug he's telling him that just to give him a heads up because he likes Pug and he thinks he actually is leaning towards like Pug is good to go. He doesn't need to die, but he just wants to let him know like, hey man, you got to like keep your shit. Like if you fuck up too much, like there's only so much I can do. I'm gonna have to vote that you should be killed and whatnot. But there's no rush because like when these wizards do their vote, the vote is just like it's a tie for now, and this guy has like essentially till he dies to like vote either way. So it's like cool. And then they talk about how the warlord's in trouble because the whole thing with like the blue circle and all that stuff, and it's a repeat of some of the stuff Kasumi was thinking about at the end of book 1. Let's see. Oh, and a lot of it with the mages are like kind of tapped out with like this whole war thing because some mages have actually died. And so a lot of them are just like, nah. And the warlord hates Pug because for some reason he feels like he's causing problems with him getting more magic users or something, which is Pug's like, I just got here, man. Anyway, but because he's a black robe, the warlord can't do anything directly, but he can have like minions that, you know, disposable minions do something about it. So Pug just needs to keep an eye out for that. Elsewhere, Martin and Charles, who's a Suwani slave guy, and another hunter, they track down a Suwani war party that has kind of like been hanging out near Crete for a while. And then we find out, then they see banners that they haven't seen in like 6 years. So it's like the members of like the Blue Circle and their friendly clans are like joining back up with the Warlord party. So it's been 6 years, right? So the undetermined amount of time has been 6 years. It's a long fucking time. Anyway, so the did I say Ribbon? The Blue Circle clan, is it Ribbon clan? Anyway, Kasumi's clan is back, right, with the war leader. And Charles talks about this, and then they get found out, so they have to make a break for it. Back in Crete, Arutha is meeting with his council when Martin and Charles and company return. They talk about the changes in their fortune, how there's probably within like the next 6 months or so, there's going to be another battle, or the war is going to pick up again, even though it's been nice and peaceful for a while. They talk about they need to get help from Krondor if they're going to survive, and then Charles explains that he starts to kind of explain to everybody here about the motivation of the High Council of Suwani, the changing alliances, the Game of Thrones stuff. We learn that Roland has been summoned home, and so him and the princess are super sad about that because they've been fucking, and you know she has a crush on him. And then Arutha tells his council that he has to sail directly to Krondor to get help from the prince. But then and then Amos is like, that's a suicide mission. You have to go through some bullshit place, and it's winter, like the waves and stuff. And then he's like, well, I already got a ship and a captain. He's like, you can't trust that captain. The only captain you can trust is me, because I'm a fucking rat-ass pirate. And I'm like, yeah, you are, Amos. So they say goodbye to everybody in Krondor. Roland heads out his way. Martin decides he's going to come with Arutha here and Amos. And so they head out, and they sail past the Stark Pass, and there's almost a mutiny. But then Amos is such a badass, he just takes some motherfucker and throws him in the water. He's like, who's next? And they're all like, no, we're good. And then he pulls the guy back out. He's like, you're gonna be an asshole? And the guy's like, no, I'm sorry, sir. And he's like, that's right, you're fucking sorry. Now get back to work. And I was like, damn, Amos, you're my favorite character in this book, hands down. And then they get through it, and they survive. And then the pirate captain gets all the praises, and everyone's like, you're the best captain ever. We'll only sail with you. We promise always do exactly what you say because we can trust you, and you got us through that crazy thing, and now we can brag about it and get laid by some pirate wenches. And everyone's like, huzzah! And then later that evening, while they're like sailing, so they're almost at Krondor, the pirate Amos and Martin are just like sitting around, and Amos is like, so does everyone else know? And Martin's like, what do you mean does everyone else know? And he's like, you know, that you're like the son of Duke Beric. And Martin like is about to pull out his sword to like kill him or something. And Amos is like, put your fucking sword down, motherfucker. Like, I'm not going to do anything or say anything. I just wanted to know. And then Martin's like, Duke Beric and Tully know, but I don't think anyone else does. And then he swears to keep it a secret. The next day they arrive. So Martin is the eldest son of Duke Beric. He's like a bastard son. But it's not a bastard son because he knocked some lady up like before he got married to the mother of Liam and what's her name? Arutha and Carline. Anyway, they get to Krondor and they see the banners of Duke Guy, who is like the black uncle. He's never actually in these books, by the way. He comes up a lot. I'm like, oh, we're never gonna meet this guy. And it's just like, he gets talked about and he's like a force in the background. And then eventually he just gets like murdered, I think. I don't know, maybe he shows up in the later books. Because I don't think it ever specifically says. I think someone says something about like imprisoning him and like making him disappear, but whatever. So things are getting a little wild out here in the east, or just in the kingdom outside of like Crete. We learn that Black Uncle Guy has been here for a while, and that he's locked up the prince. And then he's running the show, talking about the prince is like sick, and so he's trying to help out and stuff. There's also rumors of like a Keshian band coming to like invade, and so Guy actually took some of his guys and like headed out there. Amos tells Arutha about the Makers, the Thieves Guild, and essentially and about how their leader's the Upright Man and all this stuff. They also talk about how there's a bunch of people like watching the ship, and how they need to get the fuck out of here like right now because things are going south real fast. But the ship needs to be repaired because it was kind of like not in the best state, and then with the winter storm, some things got kind of fucked up, so they're not going to be able to make it anywhere unless they get it fixed up. So they're like secretly working on that. And then at some point, the pirate's just like, fuck, we got to go like right now. And so they get approached by a guy who's like wants to pretend to be a ship's crew, and the pirate captain beats the shit out of him because he's obviously a spy for whoever's running this place for Guy. And then Martin, Arutha, and the pirate and Amos make a break for it. Martin gets attacked, and then Amos goes to help him. And they're like, Arutha, just get out of here. You're the most important. So he heads out, and then he gets cornered when this kid, Jimmy the Hand, who approaches him and offers to help him for money, of course. So Arthur takes him up on that, and he follows him down into the sewers where he gets surrounded by the Makers. They tie him up, and then we find out they also grabbed Martin and Amos as well. They interrogate Arutha, what's he doing here, what's going on? And after he lies a little bit and they slap the shit out of him, he starts being honest. Tells him everything that's going on. And the guy doing the interrogating, like, he's like, all right, sounds good. So he leaves, and he brings back this sexy girl with freckles who rushes over and kisses Arutha on the cheek. And it's Princess Anita. Oh, hell yeah. The one who had a crush on him all those, like, 6-7 years ago. Now she's, like, a beautiful teenage girl, right? And so Arutha's getting the hard on about it. Anyway, so we find out that evil Uncle Guy he imprisoned the prince until he agrees to let him marry Anita. And the prince is like, hell no. And so, but he's in ill health, so he's probably going to die. Anita helped with that, or she escaped with the help of the Makers, and they're helping her like get her out of here so that she doesn't have to marry the asshole. And he's actually not like that much of an asshole. He like came in and is like, hey, I want to marry you because I want to take over his princedom, and that's gonna happen, but we don't have to have sex or anything if you don't want. I don't really care about that. Like, I'm just letting you know. And she's like, I don't want to marry you, and he's like, it doesn't matter. But he didn't try to rape her or do anything creepy or anything. Like, there's a whole point about it, and I was like, oh, he's not that bad of a guy. He's just kind of like a political asshole, you know. And because he's doing all sorts of assholery stuff. He's like taxes and pressing people into service, and he's like that kind of asshole, but he's not like a rapist. He's not a monster. He's just like doesn't give a fuck about people, right? He's like an American politician level of evil. Well, maybe he's actually less evil than the average American politician, unfortunately. Jesus Christ. Anyway, so at this point, the Keshian thing's starting to wrap up, and he's probably rushing his way back because he heard the princess disappeared. So they got like 10 seconds to get the fuck out of here. So we get some scenes of Arutha and the princess being all snuggle buddies and talking about how he likes her and she likes him, and they're being all cutesy and stuff, even though they're cousins. And then the Makers get rid of the people on the ship and replace them with the crew. I think the original crew who were loyal to Amos, and then they get in the ship and they make a break for it, and they're barely able to escape back to Crete with the help of the Makers. And also Jimmy at the last second, he's like getting attacked by somebody, and Arutha like tosses him a rapier, and he's like, Jimmy, and he's like, call me Jimmy the Hand, and he fights that guy off, and then we don't see him for a little bit, but he's a super big deal later, like in the next book and in like both the games, so don't forget about Jimmy the Hand. Anyway, back to Crete. We get some more bad news. Roland was killed. Oh no! Carlin is like devastated about the whole thing. They talk about it, and she's holding herself together pretty well because she's got to take care of Anita, who's lost her dad. But Carline, she's pretty messed up because she lost Pug, and now she lost Roland. And like, what is she gonna do? Don't worry, fellas. Don't worry, all your white knights. She gets her piece of ass later. And then she's super excited for her cousin to marry her brother, of course, because incest is the best. Just. Lord, good stuff. So moving back to Pug, again, he's Millibur. He's doing great. It's been years, and now he's like a master magician, and he's wearing the black robes, and he's integrated into the assembly and everything. And there's like this funny story about an old manor that used to be something, and then something happened to it, and now there's just like sheep herders wandering around it. And so he shows up, and he meets with the main Suwannee sheep herder guy, and he's like, hey, I'm gonna take this over, but don't worry, I'm not gonna kick you guys out. You can continue to do whatever, just so you know. And the guy's like, thank you for being magnanimous. Great one. And then he does all sorts of like fun decorating. He like gets a bunch of slaves and kind of like treats them like freemen, and they come work on his thing, and they're all slaves from like his homeworld. Whatever. He decorates the whole thing like very strangely, quote unquote, because it's more like the place he grew up and not like Suwannee, and that ends up becoming like part of the it ends up becoming like like, ooh, everyone in the Suwannee Empire is like, ooh, look at this guy's fancy mansion, and people like come and look at it, and it's like fancy art, and they're like, oh, this is different, this is very good. I haven't seen like anything like this like ever. This is so much fun. And we find out that he's becoming the talk of the empire, and also that he's spending a lot of time studying rifts and how rifts work and all that stuff. And then one day, one of his homies comes to visit, and Millibird tells him that about all the stuff he's looking into and whatnot. They talk about the situation with Suwannee people, how they've like really stagnated in terms of like old art and culture and all this other stuff, and they need to make some changes so they can start actually being involved again with all this stuff. And he mentions the whole focus being on like war and slaves is really like stagnated, and so it's some good political commentary about slavery and how it's terrible, not because of the human part, which is terrible, but as a cultural, when you're looking at it from like an empire standpoint, it's bad because it stagnates the people and makes them lazy and whatnot. And because their culture is really stagnated, they haven't been able to excel as much as they should have. And so part of what Mellibur wants to do, as you know, because he considers himself like Suwannee at this point, like in his head, he's never going back to another place. Like this is his home and his people, and he's gonna go get his like wife at some point, Katala. I looked it up. That's her name, Katala. While I was recording these videos. And so he's got to go take care of all that stuff. So he wants to change things, but no rush. It takes a while for the culture to change and stuff. And his homie agrees. He's like, all this stuff you're saying is very scary, but I think you're right. I think it is necessary. He's like, hey man, it's been a while since you've been to like an assembly meeting. You should come, just so you know people don't talk as much. And he's like, yeah, that's fine. So they go, and this guy gets condemned to death, and for doing something, and Pug is like, nah, I abstain from voting, whatever. I don't agree, I disagree, just whatever. So then they talk about dealing with the warlord and how he's kind of an asshole, and a lot of people are kind of sick of him and his shenanigans. They meet up with another homie, and Millibird talks to him about getting his wife back, and there's a whole funny, like, the one homie's like, oh, don't get a wife, wives suck. My wife is essentially, like, I'm a slave to my wife. She, like, tells me shit. I spend as much time as I can in, like, the great library studying shit, so I don't have to deal with her assholery. And I'm like, based. Anyway, he's like, no, it's even better. It's even better because in Pug or Millibird is like, oh, I'm not worried about that. The wife I want is a slave, and his homie's like fist bump, bro. That's what I should have done. That's a hell of a good idea. Because she's gonna be grateful, and I'm like, wow, this book came out like the 80s, and I'm like, I could like read this off to somebody now, and they're like, hell yeah, that's exactly how it is right now. Because these bitches think they're all important and stuff, and they want to run men's lives like they're the queen, and then so these passport bros go to these other countries. These women are just like barely getting by, but they're beautiful and they're like talented, and they have all these like skills and house making stuff, and they are so grateful and hot and young and they're assholes, and they treat their husbands well, and the husband treats them well, and they have like a beautiful relationship, and like and I was like, damn dude, this guy saw the future. It's so good. Anyway, this book's pretty good, not gonna lie. Anyway, Melba, what did I say? Oh, so then he heads out. We pick up with Lori and Kasumi, and they're just like kicking it. And then they find out the Great One is coming to visit, and it's Mellibird. And he wants to talk to Lori alone, of course. So they talk about all the stuff Mellibird's been doing. They talk about his girlfriend and how she never married. And also, dun dun dun, he knocked her up. So he's got a 4-year-old. And Pug's like, what the fuck? And it's like, yeah, for sure. You want to meet him? And he's like, hell yeah, I want to meet him. Bring him over here. And his name's William. I can't remember why. She's like, William? That's not a Suwannee name. And it's something about, like, I don't remember. He, like, told her a story, or Lori told her a story or something. And so she got it in her head that, like, she liked that name because it, like, made her feel connected to Pug, who wasn't there anymore because obviously he was off being, like, a fucking awesome mage and whatnot. And so and so she's going to be psyched because she's been loyal to him this whole time, just raising their son, waiting for him to come back because, she's an honest woman. And it's like, holy shit, man. Like, let's circle back to that passport bro thing again. Like, 4 fucking years. This super hot babe with a kid was just like waiting for a man to return because he said he'd come back. Like, Jesus Christ. Can you imagine meeting a woman in this day and age like that? I can, because I didn't marry a passport girl, but I know lots of guys who did, and I can speak for my wife as well. She would like hang out and wait around, I promise. So do better, men. Like, don't put up with their bullshit. Let them be single cat women. There's tons of women in this world you can find who are awesome. Anyway, let's see. Okay, so then he goes to talk to the clan leader, and he's like, hey, I want my wife And I want my girlfriend, and she's gonna be my wife, and I want my son, and I want Lori. And the clan leader gets super concerned, and then Lori and Kasumi come back, and Lori explains that like actually, the Blue Circle clan has always been against the war, and they've always been like a member of like the secret peace party, and so they're working things behind the scenes. But what their plan is to send Kasumi and Lori in to speak with King Roderick to make an alliance with the Emperor, because the Emperor also doesn't want war. The only one who wants war is the Warlord, because he's the biggest asshole of them all. Because they just want some metals. So if they can just trade for metals, they can like have peace and everything will be great, and they won't have to worry about all this bullshit anymore. And so he needs Lori because Lori's going to help Kasumi. And so Pug's like, oh, I get it. Yeah, you can keep him. Sorry, I didn't realize that. And, like, you cool with that, Lori? And Lori's like, oh, yeah, hell yeah, I'm cool with that. Let's see. So, yeah, and it's like this is our final gambit with like the Game of Thrones shit and whatnot. And so Melibar wishes them luck and takes Katala and William back with him. All right, back over to the elves. We get Martin Longbow. He's visiting the elves. I guess he wasn't there earlier. I think I misunderstood that. Anyway, he sees Thomas, and he's like, holy shit, you've changed a lot. And then everyone kind of recognizes there's some issues with his behavior or whatever. And Thomas himself is being kind of overwhelmed by like this darkness or by like whatever this thing is. Maybe the queen is very fearful because she has a lot of lust for him, but he's kind of treating her like an object, like a sexual object, and she's kind of thrilled by it, but also kind of concerned. And then Prince Khaled is like very cautious of him and very concerned. So then everyone kind of talks about this upcoming battle with the Suwani and whatnot, and how the elves and dwarves are going to go and help Creedy. That's the whole reason Martin came over here, was to like double check and make sure everyone's good to go. Thomas continues to have some like really crazy visions, and then we learn that there's like factions. Like the older elves are all very concerned about him and his like dominance over like the court, but the younger elves are like super inspired by him because he has some sort of like power over them, which is his like existence, right? Which is kind of like the Venu or whatever, like the original elf king or whatever. Because he's embodying this armor is like the armor of the ancient elf king, like before they split, and so he has some like he's gaining some powers from that, and he's transforming and whatnot. At some point, the dwarves are all like, hey, we caught a bunch of Suwani slaves. And Martin's like, nice, let's go talk to him. And then Thomas comes over and just fucking starts slaughtering them. And then he orders the elves in like an ancient language, like none of them really understand anymore, that this order is like, they can't resist it. So they're like, it kind of like mind controls them because it's like an order from the ancient king and all this stuff. And so they start like killing the slaves as well. And then he has like this internal struggle where he has to fight with like the spirit of the ancient king to like gain dominance, or he's gonna let this thing take dominance over him. And finally he's able to break free, and he like cries, and he like is having like a real hard time, and he's like telling everyone to stop and all this stuff. So he sobs over his actions and whatnot. And then the elves are like, oh, thank God he overcame the darkness. We were gonna be really fucked. A bit later, the queen is waiting in her bedchamber, and again, she's having these qualms where she's like, I have a lot of lust for this guy, and love maybe, but I'm scared of him at the same time. But part of being scared makes me want to fuck him some more. And I'm like, so crazy bitch, man. What the fuck is wrong with you? Anyway, in my notes, I'm like, women, am I right? That's facts. It's like women, like they do all these polls about sexual interest and stuff, and like strangulation for women is like super high up, along with like, I would say what else. This video is actually going to go on YouTube. Anyway, so I know bitch she doesn't give a fuck. I would spread out my video uploads. Anyway, so he comes in, he apologizes for being an asshole and whatnot, and then they fuck. Yay. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Lori and Kasumi, they're going on their merry little adventure. They come with the Suwani who are like coming through the rift, and they sneak out. Then they like leave like the brother, I think, in charge, and they're like, hey, don't tell anyone we're going anywhere, but we're going. And like, yeah, I got you, bro. And so they're able to like sneak out of there pretty easy, and they head to Krondor, and it's real bad there. Like, he is a terrible leader. And so they meet up with Jimmy the Hand, and the makers help them like escape. Then they had to talk to King Roderick, and he has like lost his fucking mind. And also apparently he's killed the prince. Jesus. And so but no one knows but him and a few counselors, including Guy and whatnot. So then Kasumi and Lori are like, shit, we should go talk to Beric. So they get ready to escape before the king decides that he's gonna kill them. And then he demands like the head of Duke Beric. And so one of the counselors is like, hey, I'm gonna help you get out of here because you gotta warn Beric, and you got to try to make sure this doesn't happen because the king's like completely lost his fucking gourd. And so he helps him get out of there. And finally they go on some more like merry adventures, and they get to sorry, I keep saying Beric, and he believes them, and he's like, yeah, we got to take care of this, and we might have to march before we fight the Sewanni and whatnot. And yes, we would definitely like to have a peace treaty, but we got to kind of figure out what's going on with that, and if we needed like civil war between the East and the West, then maybe that's what needs to happen. Back over in the Sewanni homeland, there's a big event that's being hosted by the warlord. And it's some celebration for the emperor, and there's going to be a whole lot of bloodshed and all this kind of stuff. And what's his fucking name? It's like Malabar. Pug is very disheartened by the whole situation, right? And it's like this is the one part of like being a Sewanni that he can like not stomach or whatever. And he's like, well, I better go because I am a Sewanni. I have a Sewanni wife, and I'm here forever, so I might as well just like try to embrace the whole cultural aspect or whatnot. But he gets there, and he doesn't like. And then there's like a whole thing. There's like a gladiator arena, and people are fighting and whatnot. And then at some point, the warlord wants to like dishonorably like execute like some prisoners or slaves or whatever, even though they fought well. And then people in the crowd are like not having it, and the emperor's not liking it, and the warlord's just being a total asshole. And finally, like Meliber's like had enough. Let's see. So he tells his like close friends who are other members of like the Black Robes, he's like, hey, take care of the emperor and head out. I'm going to take care of this shit. And then he blasts the shit out of the Colosseum. He destroys the warlord's men, and he crushes the Colosseum in like an elemental spree of like destruction. And then he like teleports home to get his wife and William. And then he heads over to the Blue Circle clan leader to talk about things. And he tells him what he did. And, you know, they talk more about the Progressive Party and the peace parties and how they've united against the war and how the emperor supports them. And how the warlord is like losing favor fast or whatever, and that because he got so like fucked over by like Meliber, by a great one, and how like this whole thing like fell apart, and how he's doing so bad, he's probably going to suicide himself. But he's also, before he does that, is probably going to send assassins to kill Meliber because he like fucked him over. And Pug's like, yeah, I know, I'm about to get out of here. And then a Black Robe mage shows up and confront him, and he's like, hey, whoa, I'm not here to like fight you or anything. I just want to have a talk. So they chit chat. About everything that's been going on, about Meliber and what his plans are and what the plan for the assembly and all that stuff is. And they talk about how like this is going to change a lot of shit in the Sewanni people. There's going to be a lot of turmoil, a lot of changing of hands of land and all this stuff. And then Meliber like reemphasizes that when everything he's done, stopping the warlord, all this stuff, all this cultural stagnation, it's for the Sewanni people. And the guy's like, yeah, I believe you, and I kind of believe you, like I want to believe you, and what you say speaks true. And then Pug says he's going to destroy the rift, and the guy's like, that's impossible. And it's like, we got to destroy the rift because we got to stop this war, and this whole thing is like crazy. And he's like, that's why I've been studying the rift magic for so long, so I can make sure this happens. So then he takes Katala and William, and he goes back to his homeworld. At that point, he dismisses the Blue Circle guys. He's like, hey, like the son, he's like, hey man, go back to your father and make sure he's okay, and like things are going to change. Like, get out of here. The warlord, this war is like done. It's a dunsies. The warlord. He then mounts a horse and heads to Crete. And then when he gets to Crete, they're like, who are you? And he's like, I am Pug of Crete, and I have returned. And then we find out that Duke Boric is dying, and it's super sad. And so Pug goes to visit him, and Pug sits with him, along with Kasumi and Lori and Colgan, and then some other fucking Duke. And at that point, the Duke reveals that Martin is his oldest son, which we knew about, but no one else here knew about, except Tully. Also, that he left a bunch of gold for Pug and a fucking island. And so that they can take the gold and they can start it's like the island of Starduck, where he's going to start like the Magic Academy, because he wants to, I guess like, I had assumed there was like some sort of like magic schools or apprenticeship stuff or whatever, but apparently it's just like wizards wandering around doing whatever the fuck they want, right? And if they take apprentices, they do or not. And he wants like a more organized system, because like that would have helped Pug and helped other magicians, and some of these magicians are just getting fucked over because they don't have anywhere to go. And so Pug and Colgan can like make that happen, and so that's fucking awesome. Like he's like, here's an island, here's a whole bunch of fucking gold. Also, you are my nephew now. I have adopted you into our family, so you're not just like some fucking squire. You're like high up in like the ranks of like, you're like fifth in line for the throne or some crazy shit like that at this point. And it's like, damn. So now he's like a duke or a baron or whatever, which is fucking awesome. But then the Duke dies, which is super sad. King Roderick shows up and states that he's like, I'm here to kill the Duke, and they're like, the Duke's dead, and he's like, well, then I'm going to kill you, Liam, because you're now the Duke of the West, or the Prince or whatever. I'm going to hang you. And it's like, man, this is like really bad. And then so they have like some conversation about Liam just killing the king and how it's going to start a civil war and all this stuff. But he's like, no, I'm going to be honorable like my father, because he's got like the same spirit of nobility. And this causes like a lot of issues. So Pug, Laurie, and Colgan and crew talk about the whole political situation, about the armed forces of the East and West, and about things they can do to like fix this thing. And then Roderick's like, we're gonna do this hanging later. First, I gotta go fight the Suwannee, and his forces from the east like show up, and so there's a lot of like dukes and generals and barons and all this shit around. And so then he heads off, and then Liam's just waiting for death, and the rest of the guys are like, okay, so we can do this or we can do that. And then all of a sudden, like the forces come back, and they're like, we beat the Suwannee back into the rift for the most part. Like we won, even though they're not like completely driven back. But a couple of nobles died, and oh yeah, Roderick's like critically wounded, and so he got smacked the fuck out of on the head, and somehow like cured his madness. Like, which could happen. Like, he got some severe TBI. So he's like, I'm sorry, Leon, you're my cousin. I don't know what's wrong with me. My brain isn't working right and all this stuff. And so then he, in front of everybody, like all the dukes of the East and all the West and everybody who's here, he declares that Liam is the new king of all the land. In front of, like, and the way he says it, he's like, the son of my uncle, like Duke Beric, his line will now rule, and as the oldest member of the house of like whatever, you'll be the king. And at this point, Liam like knows that Martin's his older brother, and he's like, and then one of the dukes who's like friendly with the family of the Beric's family is like, shut the fuck up right now. We don't need no succession crisis. Let's deal with the Suwannee thing first, and then we can like, you can have whatever like crisis of whatever bullshit you want. And so this changes everything as well, because now that Liam's like the king, they can have a peace treaty with the Suwannee, because Roderick wouldn't do it, but Liam definitely wants to have it. So he runs off and he finds some Suwannee commander, and he speaks to him, and he's like, yeah, and everyone knows that he's been like banished from the assembly, but it's like, hey, I'm still a great one. I'm going to take me as like a hostage or whatever, and let's go present this message for the emperor. And the emperor will decide if he wants to do this or not. So they go, and the emperor accepts peace, and it's like, oh, thank God, everyone's finally going to be at peace. And so within the next month, he's going to officially come, and they're going to like figure out trade policy and all that stuff. And so Colgan and Pug sit down afterwards, and they talk about building life in the academy and how great it's going to be and whatnot. And it's a pretty good scene of them just like touching base and being like old friends, but also like Pug still treats him like his mentor, even though Pug is like Colgan recognizes that Pug is like way stronger than he is in magic. And he's excited to learn more and do all this stuff. And then he learns about Thomas and the elves, and how Thomas is still alive and everything, so he's pretty excited. Meanwhile, Thomas and the elves have like a council. Thomas and his descendants he renounces the claim to the elven throne for him and his descendants, so that Callan will be, he will rule no matter what. It's like Thomas is going to get married to the queen, who we all find out is pregnant with Thomas's kid because they fuck so much. But like him and his seed and forever more will be subservient to Callan, who is the actual like future king after the queen dies, like, I don't know, in 1,000 years, however long elves live in this world. And so that's cool. So everyone kind of accepts the marriage. And then Martin's about to stay, but they're like, no, stay for the wedding. So they do. So meanwhile, Laurie is coming to tell the elves and dwarfs about the peace treaty, and he gets intercepted by a wizard, and it's Macross, obviously. And he like mind washes him, or mind wipes him, and is like, oh, you delivered the message, I'll take care of it. You go back and tell him everything went great. And he's like, okay, sounds good. So then he does. So then Macross goes to the elves and delivers the message. Then at the wedding, you know, he goes and he like chit-chats with everybody, and we have like some nice times with Thomas and Macross talking to the elves and whatnot. And then he takes Thomas aside, and he's like, hey, so you're going to get your huge army of elves and dwarfs, and you're going to go to this peace treaty, and then you're going to attack the Suwannee, or it's going to be the end of the world. And Thomas is like, okay, sounds good. So then he takes off to set all that stuff up. And then Thomas and Dolgan the dwarf leader. Oh, and then he talks about how he set everything up for Thomas and Dolgan, that he purposely made friends with the dragon all those years ago and gave him those items, so because he knew Thomas and Dolgan would go and get that, and that all this shit would happen, and that Thomas would be okay. And he set everything up because it's super duper 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 important that Thomas goes and like interrupts his peace talks, because otherwise it's the end of the world. And Thomas is like, all right, fine, you talked me into it, let's do it. And then Macross tells Martin about his father's pronouncement. Like, he takes him aside and is like, hey, your father's pronounced you as like his oldest son, and yada yada yada. Okay, so we go forward like a month, and the peace negotiations are going well. The emperor's there with his crew, and the king Liam is like there, or he's not the king yet, but he's like the future king. And so they're like chilling in that, and then we get Thomas and the elves, and everyone's like, what are they doing over there? And then Thomas looks over and he sees the Suwannee look like they're pulling their swords out, and he's like, make it happen. And so then they charge at the Suwannee, and the Suwannee start fight back, and then there's like fighting around like the portal machine, and there's a lot of back and forth, and then the kingdom forces roll up that were like going, and everyone's like, betrayal to you, betrayal to them, what the elves are doing, oh no. And then Pug and Colgan are like, we got to stop that fucking rift or we're going to lose this. And Pug's like, I got it. And then Macros shows up and he's like, no, you don't. We got it. So he takes Pug into the machine, and he had given Colgan like a staff a long time ago, and he's like, shove that thing into the ground and don't move and just think about Pug. And then he grabs Pug and they like teleport into like this white space, which is like inside the machine of the rift or whatever. It's like in like a limbo space. And then he's like, everything's going to plan. This is great. And Pug's like, the fuck it is. Anyway, so then they blast the shit out of the portal from inside, and then it gets destroyed. And Macros is like, and now I'm dead. Or not. We'll see. And then he disappears, and then Pug's all by himself, and he's like losing his mind, and he's lost in like this limbo state. And then finally he feels like he feels Colgan, and he starts like screaming out like Colgan's name and like magical forces, and he gets like ripped back into the real world. And the portal is like destroyed, and so there's Suwannee forces, and they're like trapped over here now. But there's a whole thing where it's like when you create portals, you create them to like random worlds. So the fact that they created a world here, they built a machine, they could like create more there, right? But now that the portal is destroyed and the machine's destroyed, there's no way for them to like directly go back to like their world. So they're completely severed according to this whole situation. And so then they Liam essentially is like, stand down, Kasumi. You're the one leading these forces. We're gonna, integrate you into our society. Like, we all know ill will, and we're gonna put you in charge of like the forces in the north to protect us against the Mordrill, so you can still be like warriors. And we're gonna make you like the captain and make you like a noble. And Kasumi and his forces are like, all right, I guess we had a hand played to us, and this is the way this fucking is going. So whatever. So he's super cool with it. So he regains some honor. And then they all start discussing about Macross and what his fucking deal was and why he wanted to do this, and how closing the portal messed up the treaty, but I guess it like solved the problem, right? And then Pug and Colgan talk about how like there must be answers left on the island, so we gotta go check it out. And that Macross, before he left, he's like, hey, Sorcerer's Island, that's kind of your island now until I come back. Even though I'm dead, maybe? Question mark, probably not. So now Pug has 2 islands, which is fucking awesome. And so then Thomas and Pug meet up, and they catch up, and they, Thomas meets Pug's wife and kid, and, and then Pug's like, hey, you married the Elf Queen. Congratulations. And there's a huge celebration and everything. And then Arutha's going to go with Pug and Colgan to the Sorcerer's Isle or whatever. And we find out that he's going to be crowned the Prince of Krondor. So remember, there's a king and the prince. And that he has a talk with Anita, the princess, about being close to him and about all that stuff. And how, Liam and him have like a conversation about him being king, and how Arutha should be king or Martin should be king. And Arutha's like, just shut the fuck up and wait till I get back so we can have a further conversation about this. And they're like, okay, well, the coronation's going to take a while to go down anyway, so I'll wait because I don't want to like fuck this up too bad. Pug, Colgan, Meacham. Meacham, if you have forgotten, he's like around. He's Colgan's like kept man. Oh, man. And Rutha, and so, just some other people. They all sail to Macross's island. And once they get there, they meet our friendly, I don't know if I wrote this dude's name. He's like a goblin. He looks like a goblin, quote unquote, from the guys, but he's like very gentrified, and he's not a goblin. He's like a totally different thing. He's super highly intelligent, and he predicts like all their needs and wants like before they happen. And then he talks about Macross could see the future, and he set all this stuff up, and that Macross is like not from this world. He's from like a different world, and he's traveled to multiple worlds, and that there used to be a race of like his creatures, but like the goblin, the friendly goblin, but they all died out except him, and he's like kind of immortal sort of, but also Macross is like super immortal, and that like they're like, well, he's dead, and the guy like is like, well, he's died before, he'll be back. And it's like, okie dokie. So he takes them to like Pug or to Macross' study, and Macross has a door just like the one in the Suwannee like testing thing where Pug has to use magic to open it up and speak some words in Suwannee. And so it's like, clearly if he can open that door, then he's the one that got left behind, that Macross wanted to go open the door. So Colgan and Pug go in, and they're stunned by the amount of like knowledge and books. Like there's like a huge fucking library here of magical stuff and whatnot. And then Rutha finds a scroll with a red ribbon, and it's a map of the whole world, and it names all these islands and all these like places they've never heard of and never been to and whatnot. And they're like, holy shit, the world's like really big. Like we spent so much time just in this little area and like with the Keshians. And so this is like very good information to have. So they talk about that for a little bit. The goblin guy shows back up, and he hands Colgan a note, which is directly from Macross. It mentions the portal had to be closed because having this kind of rift open like that draws the ire of like the Dark One or the Destroyer or whatever. I think he calls him Destroyer. And that that's the same. And then Pug's like, oh yeah, when I had my like fever dream when I was getting my black robes, I saw that guy too. He like chased the Suwannee to like their land, and so that guy was like a real serious big deal. So like destroying the rift was like definitely 100% the right decision here. let's see. Macross then in the letter continues to talk about how he's not from the. Okay, that's right. The goblin doesn't tell him. They read it in the letter that he's virtually immortal. He's seen so many things. He'll probably show up back at some point. He spent his whole life seeing the future and kind of accepting it. He's accepted his death like multiple times now. And then the creature, they're like, "I'm sorry, your master's dead." And this is when the creature's like, the goblin's like, "He'll be back." Like, I'm unconcerned, which is pretty good. So then they discuss the amount of damage and the lives lost and all this stuff and how it pushes back the destroyer. But if it pushes back this destroyer, it's probably worth it. At the end, the Goblin Guy tells them that this now all belongs to Pug and Colgan and whatnot, and that they want to move all these books or like a large section of them to the ship and whatnot. And then the Goblin Guy's like, "Oh, there's a bunch of other creatures like me. We'll have it set up for like you tomorrow morning, so just go chill." And then, okay, that's good because we got to get back like right meow because the coronation is happening and Ruth has got to be back for it. Colgan's like, "I'm going to take some books with me." He's very like, "No, I want to take these books and I want to study them." Like, "All right, you can take 2 books. All right, fine, 2 books." So then we get to the last chapter, right? And so it wraps everything up kind of nice. It has like a funny ending as far as like the book on tape had, and I looked it up and it seems like that's the correct ending. Anyway, the main focus in this whole thing is the succession. So we get Liam tells Martin about his heritage and that he should be king, and then Rutha finds him and gets mad, and then they're arguing, and then there's like a plot with the Western nobles to force the convention, and they're going to do whatever it takes to make Liam or Martin the throne of the kings, and they don't want like Guy, who's like still like fucking around somewhere, to like step into this convention, and there's like all these succession problems, and then Pug's talking to everybody, and he talks to Lori, and he talks to Carline, Princess Carline, and they like, "Oh, my friend, blah, 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 blah." She gets to meet Pug's wife, and Pug's wife at first is like, "Oh, this is the lady, huh? Well, I won, so I don't give a fuck." And then Carline's like, "Nice to meet you too." And then they become like best friends because bitches, am I right? And, and they chit chat about Roland and how sad that is. And then they're talking about how they're going to remain friends and whatnot. And then Martin talks to Pug about what he should do. And Pug essentially is just like, "Follow your fucking heart, bro." And then during the ceremony, Liam stands up, takes the crown. Oh no, Liam tells everyone that Martin is the actual eldest son of Duke Barak. And then Martin like stands up, he takes the crown, and he's like, "I forsake this forever, and my lineage forsakes it forever. Liam is the king. God, God save the king." He puts it on his head, and everyone like cheers, and it's like some really good, fucking good stuff, and it's kind of sweet. And part of it is like Martin like grew up with all the boys, and like he's been friends with them forever, but now they're brothers, and that's cool. Then we see some more people and stuff winding down. There's like titles for Kasumi and such, and other dukes named. It's a lot of kind of like, it's kind of boring to be completely honest. And then it gets revealed that that Pug was adopted in the king's house, and so all this stuff. And then we start seeing Lori and Carline, they get like googly eyes for each other, and that's cool. And so she's like down to fuck, but that happens later. And then lastly, if someone like Arutha's like, "Where's Amos?" And everyone's like, and then him and Martin are like, "The fuck is Amos?" And then they like, "Oh, that fucking pirate." So they run out to like the king's ship. And it's like sailing, and there's a bunch of like sailors tied up on the on the dock, and they see Amos in the ship, and they're like, "You motherfucking pirate!" And he's like, "Aha!" And he's like, the king would have just fucking given you his ship, and he's like, "I'm a pirate. What's the fun in that?" And I'm like, "Amos, I'm gonna miss you most of all." Fucking dude, that guy is such a badass. And they just like watch him go, and they yell at him about hunting him down and all this stuff, and that wraps up the book. That's the end. That's Magician. Technically 2 books, Apprentice and Magician, but it was all one audiobook, so that's what we're going to do. Anyway, so that was great. I'm super excited to listen to Silverthorn. Now, this is not like, I love high fucking fantasy, so like obviously like Dragonlance and even Lord of the Rings to some respect, but this is definitely like the magical level in this is definitely kind of more, I would say it's a little less than Lord of the Rings generally with like its fantastical nature. There's fantastical stuff. There's like a dragon and stuff, and there was the armor, but like the use of magic and the use of some other things are like very minimal, to be completely honest. So there's like definitely magic in this world, and there's like good magic and evil magic and stuff, but the future books get a little more into it. This was a lot of like Game of Thrones, and I really don't like political shit in books that much. Like it kind of bores me to death, to be completely honest, but it's all right. So looking forward to that, and go ahead, like, share, subscribe, comment, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye-zy.